What's going on? Boys, thanks to our patrons and Fiverr customers, subscribe to our Patreon free for behind the scenes stuff. Arm yourselves, typology stuff. INTJs have an overlooked strength. It goes overlooked by most people. I think many INTJs are aware of this capacity in themselves, but they spite it. And actually, I think this has a lot to do with most INTJs' attitudes. Now, we've mentioned before a higher form or a sharper form of FI. Using FI not to consult with the FI gods or to weigh things out, but rather to get into people's shoes. This is the way FI types, when they are trying to relate with people or to feel what they're feeling because they lack the FE capacity, their instinct is to imagine themselves in what they think is this other person's shoes. That's why even high FI types are very hit or miss when they are trying to feel what another person is feeling or trying to relate with people, understand them, so on. But this more advanced form of FI, it's very good at constructing mentally or emotionally another person's shoes and then standing in them, not as the FI type would stand in them, but as this other person would stand in them. Truly, well, not truly, but as best as a person can, seeing from another person's point of view. Another example of something we should make a whole video about, sticking it in here, it's like using TI in a different way. Not trying to figure out the one equation for everything or trying to work into your understanding of and solution for a problem, but getting into another person's head and trying to see the way they are breaking down a problem. And I think as a TI Dom, especially with SI tertiary, that's a very unnatural way to use TI, which is funny because you should be better able to use it than other TI types are. Anyway, the reason I think you don't see this form of FI I'm discussing is that very reason. It's unnatural for FI types. Now, it's natural for them to try to get into another person's shoes, which on its own can be irritating, but the instinct, it seems, with FI types is not to get into another person's shoes or what you think is another person's shoes, to see things from their point of view, but rather to judge what they would do in what they think are this other person's circumstances, which is even more agitating. I imagine it takes a lot of discipline both to construct those shoes well and then also, once you're in them, to resist the urge to start judging and rather just to see. Which again, the analog, that's a limitation of TI types, an annoying limitation. I think both functions assume their judgment is correct. Meaning, why are TI types so difficult to reason with? It's because they're not even trying to engage with your TI model or equivalent of a TI model. Even if they do decide to interface with it, it's almost always under the assumption their model is correct or our model is correct, and this interfacing is happening strictly so we can see how your model can be corrected, quotes. It is very difficult and unnatural feeling to use that function just to see or try to formulate another person's line of reasoning. And if you want to pull that back even further, why is that? It's because TI, even low TI, operates under this it is or it isn't assumption. And if it isn't, well, I mean, that it's not an assumption, that is the case. But if it isn't, it is brushed aside willy-nilly, not realizing there is something to gain out of just looking at another person's line of reasoning, helping you get closer to making something or discovering something that is. And why are FI types so agitating when they're doing FI bullshit? It's for the same basic reason, but instead of reviewing lines of reasoning, they are. Well, the TI types are making assumptions as well. The FI types are making assumptions about people's essences and circumstances. And I can't decide which is more irritating. But ultimately, what differentiates them is TI can get results and FI can't. Sucks to suck. But that's what I'm talking about. And what we're about to discuss can apply to every FI type, but I think it's most potent in INTJs, and goes most overlooked in INTJs, and is spited by that type, the type best able, potentially, to use this skill. And the skill I'm talking about is just viewing things from other people's points of view, effectively. Using FI in a clinical manner, because you'll notice something about INTJs. And actually, I first really noticed it in ISTJs, and that's probably because we share SI. As far as FI types go, ISTJs I've found to be the most palatable, which is funny. I love these dichotomies and analogs that ISTP in I think the last INTJ video, mentioned hating ISTJs to the degree I hate INTJs, and not really having a problem with INTJs, whereas I don't really have a problem with ISTJs. In fact, I like them. Anyway, the ISTJs around me, the ones I noticed this capacity in, were able to recognize both when I would try to do positive things, my reasoning for doing the positive things, and most importantly, the feeling and sentimentality behind those things. As in, not just recognizing that I'm trying to do something nice and being appreciative, but more seeing me. And I don't think people get many moments like those in life in which they are seen and understood, especially in a positive fashion. And I realized this is definitely not strictly an ISTJ capacity, although I think they are very good at it. It's probably an FI capacity, and it is. And INTJs have it too. And it's curious because for some reason, this advanced form of FI, or advanced use of FI, appears, at least in my experience, more in the TJs than in the FPs. Now, you get moments with the FPs, but when TJs are keyed into this skill, they're like snipers. Now, let's think about the lowest level INTJs, in absence of anything and everything. What are they? What can you expect from a basic, nothing going on with them INTJ just putting around in the world? They're very good flexible drones, where the most dipshit ENTJ will be a very good drone with a few specialities, an INTJ will be a very good drone, and they'll know how to use their flexibility effectively. And I bring this up because you need to consider what an INTJ ascending is building toward. They are building from a foundation of effective, flexible work. And I don't think that's a mistake, because it almost feels like INTJs are designed to have that flexibility, to use that flexibility when they get to their highest level. They need it. Why do they need it? Because to reach that highest level, they need to be using FI in this more sophisticated way. They need to be able to see other people's points of view, if not agree with them, so they can use them flexibly. When you need to deal with someone or you want to get the most out of someone, you cannot underestimate how potent making a person feel seen and understood and then treated fairly goes. Because that's the thing, see, you can go around trying to treat people fairly, but if you're treating other people fairly based on your standards of fairness, you won't accomplish much. In fact, you'll probably lose a lot. But if you know how someone views fairness, because you can see, as close as a person can, the world through this person's eyes, you know how to make them feel satisfied. Or if this is someone you can or even should be dealing with, you might probably do need to take other actions in a lot of cases. In relation to all this, I've been watching lots of Grand Admiral Thrawn clips, or voiceovers, from the audiobooks maybe. There are tons of examples. His appreciation for art on a tactical level is an example of what I'm talking about in a very abstract way. Getting into people's heads and understanding them so you can fight them. But specifically, the example I'm thinking of is when some officer is ordered, I guess, to capture Luke's ship, I think, if I'm remembering correctly. But he pulls some bullshit maneuver. The officer experiments with something because he doesn't have a lot of time to try to get him to, or try to undo this maneuver. And he fails, and then Thrawn talks to him about it. What did you do? What could you have done differently? And then the officer admits he doesn't know what he could have done differently. Which, in this Star Wars Empire context, feels like putting a rope around your neck. But Thrawn does something unexpected. He says that maneuver has never been countered. There are ideas, but none work so far yet. The one you deployed was one of the more advanced and innovative ones, and you did it on the fly. Here's a promotion. Figure out how to counter this. He understands and appreciates what the officer was trying to do from his point of view, and then rewards him for it. And this is not just a good leadership thing or a recognizing talent thing, though it is. It's also a clear example of using FI in this more tactical, sophisticated way. In other words, sterile, non-emotional empathy is like a scalpel. However, we mentioned earlier, using FI in that way it doesn't come naturally. But with INTJs, there seems to be a rejection of even thinking to do something like that. Because here's another thing pattern I noticed in the INTJ cuntiness phenomenon. You can be authentic even in opposition of other people without being ugly. If you're these saints, but we won't call you saints because you're too humble for that, these reasonable, just trying to do their best people present themselves as. They are almost always ugly about it. And I've been thinking about why that is. And I think it's a mixture of what FI is plus FI's position in their stack, tertiary FI. I think they're repulsed by the idea of trying to see things from other people's point of view without judgment. You take a pungent function and put it in a pungent position in the stack, And it becomes more than just a typical FI assumption of rightness. It's almost like a fear or an anger at the idea other points of view or versions of FI could exist. They feel threatened by it. And on its face, that's an annoying way to act, but that feeling by itself wouldn't be limiting. It would be limiting in some ways, but it wouldn't necessarily limit you from what we're talking about here. The reason it's limiting is because it's not just an assumption of correctness or feeling threatened by other points of view. It is those two things structured in a way or engaged with in a way that shuts out even the possibility of trying to use FI in this more sophisticated way. It's like even entertaining the idea is threatening to their identity. The FI tertiary assumption, their idea of the way a person should live is the only way a person should live. So they don't try to take advantage of this skill they have. Now, as other FI types do, they do try to get into other people's shoes, but it's always with the purpose of determination. Does this align with what I think, or the way I think people should be, or does it not? And they do this to people, they go to people to do this to them, by the way. And when it doesn't align, or God forbid, if someone comes around and it doesn't, they get difficult and combative quickly. In other words, they have a higher advanced form, the same way we say high level ENTJs are basically a different type from lower level ENTJs. INTJs have their own variation of this, but they are designed to keep themselves from it. And I wonder how much of that is intentional, like some Highlander shit. Only a certain number of these evolved INTJs can exist at any one time. And these advanced forms of types are interesting because once you've arrived at one, there are bunches of possibilities for ways to be. Tons of possibilities for ways to look at and think about functions. As in, ENTJs get stereotyped as leaders, and they can make good leaders. I don't think super high-level ENTJs are leaders, actually. But even good ENTJ leaders have a more symbolic quality to them. They're very good at knowing who to order to do what, but their power comes from being a symbol, representing something. Whereas INTJ leaders, the more advanced ones, can lead via that human touch. And when leading people, it's interesting because representing something inspires one form of loyalty, the human touch inspires another form of loyalty. There's a lot to think about here. Has nothing to do with this video, but that's some juicy meat to chew on. And INTJs could achieve this by detaching themselves from FI, at least when they are using it. They don't even need to do away with the way they normally feel about FI, but they don't, and they won't. Most of them, most of the time. They are programmed, in fact, not only to keep themselves weak, but also to destroy themselves by making bunches of enemies, using the tool that could take them to the stars. It's ironic. And I think that's it for this one. Like if you enjoyed, subscribe if you haven't.